No, it's that's yours.
I do my best. How are you? Thank you. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Because I subscribe to work. So it comes out Tuesday, Wednesday, and I can't really check it, but I'm so I don't. Even though it sounds like it right now, I don't. So and even though like on Tuesday or Wednesday, shit, Andy was something. So I knew it was there. So I'll see if I get to work. If he needs more of my work time. So anyway, then he called me on Thursday. He was here. I was like, here, school. He said, I said, reading one. Yeah, I did. He said, I love a lot of that might be my favorite. That I had forgotten. I've seen it, but I've forgotten that one. It's so. Everybody should look on everything. I was in the room in the bar. We just moved to town. Well, we were watching these like that all the time. And we watched. I was my 14,000 students and 38 just one day. I feel so much. Hello, you're straight up on island. I know she said that, and I thought, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. But I couldn't put it worse, but that saying is not very old. I was always looking which I didn't understand. 70% of the day. Oh my gosh. It is. It is. Yes. You can understand that. Yes, I'm going to search for that. I wish I was searching. Yeah, JD got that. Good evening. This is not that bad of a crowd for Labor Day weekend. I'm kind of impressed. So, way to go, guys. So, why don't you go ahead and stand and turn and love on each other a bit. Hugs, handshakes, high fives.
Nathan, now don't you push any buttons and roll us through the rug because I can't move as fast as you boys on foot. But it's a total joy to watch you. So you just bring a lot of happiness to people. So thank you for letting me know to make us happy. Yeah, it is so much fun to watch. And then you have your favorite store.
It is.
Okay, I
This next song is another new one. It's another one we do at the prison, but I want to teach you guys it. For one, I want us to sing it right after the sermon because I think it really goes well with what we're going to be looking at tonight. But I want you to be somewhat familiar with it when we get to it, okay? So here's what the chorus sounds like. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Try singing that. I give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Here I am. Here I stand. Lord, my life is in your hands. Lord, I'm hungry to see your desire revealed in me. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can take my heart. Take my heart. Take my life as a living sacrifice. All my dreams, all my plans, Lord, I place them in your hands. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. God, I pray that you will teach us more of what that looks like. Teach us how we're supposed to live that out in our lives. Give us a picture of what kind of demand that might place on our lives. Give us an idea of some of the changes we personally need to make. Give us an idea of the joy-filled life that kind of life offers us. Teach us through your word. Shape us, shape our thinking. I pray that when we leave here, we'll be different than what we were when we came in. Lord, love in Jesus' name. Amen. Go ahead and be seated. All right, so I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but I just want to say it again, and we'll say it a couple more times, but before time comes. But one of the challenges of being a fella in this day and age is we're not always, in my opinion, we're not always exactly clear on what our role is, what we're supposed to be in our families, our communities, our workplaces, and that leads to some confusion and frustration and mistakes on our part. And sometimes we just need a place and a context and a relationship where we can process that. So that being the case, starting, we're probably going to do it in November. That's what I think is what's going to be happening. I need to get with Dave and kind of Dave Sprague and nail that down. But probably, I think maybe the second weekend in November is what we're looking at. We're trying to kind of, where the fall's kind of on its way, but we're not quite to, that first weekend of shotgun season, for here. There's a sensitive window when you're talking about ministry to guys. So anyway, it cannot be right in the heart of one of the 2 weekends of deer season. So anyway, that's like a holiday around here. I mean, the school's empty out, So anyway, so that's probably what we're going to do. But we're going to start a group called Joshua's Men. We used to do this years ago at First Christian Church, and they have revamped the material, and we're going to start with that. It meets once a month, 4 hours at a pop. In preparation for it, you read a book and possibly do some other things. It's a men's group, but more specifically, it's dealing with issues pertaining to leadership in your home, leadership in the church, leadership in the community. So there's different subjects that we'll be talking about. So fellas, just kind of have that in your brain. If that's something you're interested in, we're not going to have okay, now it's time to sign up. If you know that's something you want to do, say something. And when people say something to me, I have a list on my phone. I'm just starting to type their names in just so we can kind of have a running list. So if you're interested, say something to me, say something to Dave Sprague, and we'll just kind of note have you on our brain. Another thing, just so you guys know, each Wednesday we have youth group for the students, junior, senior high, and just recently we kind of went through a change. Sammy has started kind of leading that. I still participate, and Amber's still going to participate, but both of us do a perfect schedule, and we having other stuff going on. Sometimes there was a challenge, and there were times even this summer when we had to cancel it. And Sam, I still remember when Nathan resigned from the youth ministry. She stood up in front of the whole church and said, "I think y'all should hire me." And everybody laughed, and she wasn't laughing. She was like, "I'm serious. I think you should hire me." So anyway, so I remember that, and I thought, I think she could do it. So anyway, so she started leading. She actually led the group this past week and did a fantastic job. So anyway, I just wanted you guys to be aware of that so you could pray for her. Like I said, I'm still going to be around when kids have questions that maybe Sam is not ready for. Amber's still going to be around. Her background in counseling and therapy, that's just what better resource you want to have with her teens. And so she'll still be around for those deeper issues and stuff like that. But Sammy's going to be the lightning rod, making it happen. The big kahuna, the big cheese. So anyway, she's going to be the one doing that. So just keep her in your prayers as she ministers to our students. Go ahead and open your Bibles if you want. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. We're going to look at the whole chapter tonight. And I want us all to be looking at it tonight. So just in case you didn't bring your Bible or you forgot or whatever, I stuck Bibles under Aubrey actually helped me. We stuck them under every other chair. Okay? So if you don't have it, or if you definitely want to use the same version I'm using the New Living Translation. And we're in 1 Corinthians 9. If you're not sure where 1 Corinthians is, that's okay. We are dealing with ancient text here. It's on page 922 of this Bible. So anyway, if you want to find it. But I want you to have that in front of you because we're going to go through the chapter. And so you can kind of fish that out. While you're fishing it out, I mentioned before that the boys and I, specifically Ezra and Simon and I, are watching through the seasons of Smallville again. Big to do in the Wood household. We watched through that, Isaac and I, and Ezra. Ezra was very young, and we watched through it back in the day. But it occurred to us, as much as Simon loves superheroes and magic and adventure and all that, it occurred to us, we were like, he needs to watch Smallville. This is like a series rite of passage that he missed. So we bought all 10 seasons, we're watching it together and having a blast doing it. And so keep your fingers crossed, we might watch an episode tonight, so we'll see after this is done. But just this, Isaac won't really watch it. He just has other stuff to do. He's a big bad high schooler now, kind of buzzing around doing his thing. So every once in a while he'll plop in though, and he'll kind of plop down and say, where are you? And we'll tell him, and he seemed kind of, you know, he might remember it, he might not, but it's a little fuzzy in his brain. But this past week, we were watching an episode, and he came in, and as soon as he saw it, he's like, oh, is this the factory episode? The episode where they attack the factory? And I said, yes, it is. He's like, oh my gosh, I love this episode. He plopped down, even though it was at the tail end of it. And I said, I can't believe you remember that. He said, I cannot even tell you how many times I watched this episode. And it's one of the coolest episodes because, you know, the whole story is the coming of age story of Clark Kent, Superman. But throughout it, he meets other friends, you know, and so and so you see the Green Arrow kind of make an appearance, and Cyborg, and Aquaman, and the Flash. And in this one episode, all of them come together to attack this factory owned by Lex Luthor. And so, you know, they're all doing their thing. It's just fun. It's kind of like, you know, the beginnings of the Justice League, Superman and the Justice League, or Superman and his amazing friends. They actually use that line. Chloe says, Clark, you have some amazing friends. It's kind of like, I see what you did there. So anyway, but it's this really, really fun episode. And so that's the main storyline. But there's this background storyline going on in that Lois Lane is a couple with Oliver Queen, who is the Green Arrow. And they're a great couple. But you know that relationship can't last. Not because of anything that they're doing, although they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. But that's not why. We know it can't last because Lois Lane has to be with Clark Kent, right? So you know it's got to fold at some point. But still, it just kills you to kind of see it happening. And in this episode, they're starting to have problems at the beginning of the episode because, you know, she wants more of his attention. He keeps disappearing at random times to, you know, go be the Green Arrow and save the world. She doesn't know that. She doesn't know he's the Green Arrow. So she can't figure out what's going on. And so he commits to it. He says, you know, we need to get away. We just need to get away. So we're going to go. I can't remember where they were going. Do you remember where they were going? It's not a big deal. I was just curious. If you had on top of people. But, you know, Monte Carlo or something like that. And something like, I mean, really nice, you know. And so she, you know, during the whole episode, she's buying bathing suits, she's packing, you know, she's getting all excited, and he's out saving the world. Well, anyway, at the end of this episode, when they find out, you know, when they destroy this factory, when in the process they find out what Lex Luthor is doing all over the world, and so they get this larger mission of what they need to do, and they're starting to get ready for it. And the last scene is Lois coming into Oliver Queen's, you know, loft or whatever. She's got her bags packed, and he's like, he totally forgot about the trip. And not only did he totally forget about it, he knew, I'm not going. I can't go, you know. And she realizes what, she doesn't know why he's forgotten about, she doesn't know what, but she just begs him. And it's just this, you know, if you can get sappy in Smallville, this was the moment, you know. And it is gut-wrenching. And she's just, it's this really touching scene, and she just begs him. She says, please come with me. And he just says, I can't. And she said, why? Why can you not come with me? And this is what just killed me when he said it. He said, because there are some things in this world that are more important than what I want and what I love. And it's just, again, I know it's Smallville, and I know it's Green Arrow talking to Lois Lane, you know. And so, but if you could just separate that moment and what he says was just powerful. There's some things in this world more important than what I love and what I want. You know, Jesus, when he was on this earth, he said things like, if anyone wants to follow me, so, you know, anyone, that's an invitation to anyone, you know. So he throws it open, but here's what he says. If anyone wants to follow me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Take up his cross daily. That's what it says in Luke. The daily is not in there in Matthew, but in Luke it says, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. And you know, many of us have probably heard that, we're probably somewhat familiar with that. And you know, familiarity breeds contempt. You know, you hear that, it's like, yeah, I know that. But sometimes I don't think we really hear that verse. Because if we really heard that verse, we would probably get a little more ticked about it than we do. Because him saying that gets all up in our stuff. Because And we wouldn't really like it if we thought about it, because, you know, this idea of taking up your cross daily, I mean, taking up your cross, this reference to him being crucified. But here's the thing, typically with crucifixion, it kind of only happens once, you know, it kind of takes, is the idea. You know, you don't really get out of that and get to do it again the next day. That's just the way it is. So when he says take up the cross daily, he's obviously using figurative language. He's using a metaphor. But what he's saying is this act of dying to yourself, this act of being crucified, is supposed to happen on an everyday basis in everyday stuff. Most of us, we'd say, man, I would die for Jesus in a heartbeat. If it's choosing between him and bowing the knee to Allah, I'm Jesus all the way. And I don't doubt that. But we don't often think about what does it mean to die daily, in the daily stuff, in the everyday stuff. What does it mean to deny ourselves in that stuff? What does it mean to die to ourselves? What does it mean to give up what we want and what we love because of something that's more significant and more important? What does it mean to deny ourselves and to die to ourselves daily when it comes to the moral gray things, the areas of moral gray morality that we were talking about last week? What does it mean to do that? And this text, I think, speaks to that. Yeah, if any of you are keeping attendance, if you just add one more to that number, we got a cricket over here somewhere. Of course, he might be actually under the floorboards. We don't know. So anyway, so I heard him at the end of practice, and I thought I was going to go get him, and then I thought, there's no telling. And crickets, they're like ventriloquists, right? They could be over there, and they're making it sound like that. I don't know how they do it, but so just kind of feel like you're out under the stars, listening to the crickets chirp. So anyway, so this text really speaks to that. And so the first thing I want to do, I want to set the stage. What we usually do, I get to this point, and then I read the text in its entirety, right? And then I talk about it, and we roll on. I'm not going to do it like that tonight. I want to kind of set the stage, and then basically we're going to read through it together, okay? And stop at different points. I'm going to say a few things along the way. And my goal is really that we would just hear it well as it happens. My goal all the time really is for us to walk away with kind of this sense of what would those first people sitting in the folding chairs in the first church of Corinth, back in the first century, how would they have heard this? Where would their toes have been stepped on? What would they have laughed at? How would they have celebrated? That's always my goal. I'm not saying that's accomplished, but that's always my goal. But I really want that to happen tonight, and I think that we kind of have kind of the context in mind and some ideas in mind as we read through this. We'll kind of hear it well for ourselves. So anyway, so just to set the stage, I want to, as we read this tonight, he's not going to say one thing about any moral gray areas like we talked about last week. He's not going to say one thing about participating in sacrificial meals in the temples like we talked about last week. He's not going to say one thing about it. But that's what's on his brain, okay? That's the issue he's dealing with. He talked about it in chapter 8. He's not done with it yet. He's coming back to it in chapter 10. This is something that Paul does all the way through 1 Corinthians, which I totally missed until like the last week, really. And I even read the same commentary 3 times, and he says this. And I somehow missed it. But Paul does this all the way through 1 Corinthians. He'll address an issue, and he'll say some general things about it, and then he'll go off on this seemingly unrelated tangent that really gets at the core of the issue. And then he comes back to the specifics of what they're supposed to do. He does it all the time. He does it in 1 Corinthians. He does it in chapters 1 through 3 and 4. He does it in chapter 7, the marriage chapter we just looked at. That's why that chapter so darn long. He does it here in chapters 8, 9, and 10. He'll do it in chapters 12, 13, and 14 when he's talking about worship and speaking in tongues and prophecy and all that jazz. So he does it a lot, okay? So this is the part where he goes off on this tangent that seems unrelated, and yet it gets at the very core of the issue, the real heart issue that they need to address in their life. So we need to have that in their brain, that he's dealing with this issue of their wanting to participate in these sacrificial meals in the temple, and by golly, they have the right to do it. See, I didn't count on this because I didn't want to flip anything over in any communion trays. So I stopped myself. Bam, I'm learning. All right. If you guys weren't here for that, it was a trip when that happened. And Kaylee Mulkins, if you're watching, laughed your rear end off at me the whole time. It was great. So anyway, they're insisting, I have the right to do this. I have the right to do this. They don't think it's wrong, and therefore I have the right to do this. And so that's what they're insisting on. And while that might not be a big issue for us, we have other moral gray issues that some think are wrong, some think are right, and some might say, I have the right to do this. This isn't wrong, no matter how you grew up. It's not wrong, and so I want to do it, okay? So that's kind of what we have to have in the back of our brain. So that's one thing. The second thing is if you remember from the context of the book as a whole, this is a church that has a problem with Paul's leadership. He's already had to reassert his leadership a couple times and trying to get them to say, I stop challenging my authority. I'm the one that planted you. You wouldn't know Jesus if it wasn't for me. And he had to do that back in chapters 3 and 4. So this is a church that's challenging his authority. So you can just imagine how they're going to react when he's addressing them about something that they don't want that and saying that they're insisting on their right to do, and he's starting to step on their toes. You can imagine how they might respond to that. Okay, so with that in mind, keeping that context in mind, the book as a whole, the fact that he's got this authority issue with them, and the specific issue of participating in sacrificial meals in the pagan temples, let's read this chapter bit by bit. First, verses 1 through 3. Chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. Am I not as free as anyone else? Am I not an apostle? Haven't I seen Jesus our Lord with my own eyes? Isn't it because of my work that you belong to the Lord? Even if others think I am not an apostle, I certainly am to you. You yourselves are proof that I am the Lord's apostle. And this is my answer to those who question my authority. Okay, so right out of the gate, we can see Paul's kind of turned the corner a little bit, and he's on the defense, right? Some people are judging him. People are sitting in judgment of him. They're challenging his authority. And right out of the gate, he's asserting the fact, am I not an apostle? Do I not have rights? He says, haven't I seen Jesus, the Lord, in person? Which what he means by that is that was kind of one of the criteria for being an apostle. You had to have seen him in person. And Paul says, I did. I saw him on the Damascus Road when he knocked me down and appeared to me in a vision that I saw him. And so he's asserting his, and he says, even if nobody else could say I'm their apostle, I'm your apostle, you guys wouldn't know Jesus if it wasn't for me. So he's asserting himself as their leader, as their apostle. The question is, why would they challenge his apostleship? Why would they challenge his leadership, his being an apostle? We're going to see it, I think, in these verses 4 through 14. So let's keep reading. Don't we have the right to live in your homes and share your meals? Don't we have the right to bring a Christian wife with us as the other apostles and the Lord's brothers do and as Peter does? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have to work to support ourselves? What soldier has to pay his own expenses? What farmer plants a vineyard and doesn't have the right to eat some of its fruit? What shepherd cares for a flock of sheep and isn't allowed to drink some of the milk? Am I expressing merely a human opinion, or does the law say the same thing? For the law of Moses says, you must not muzzle an ox to keep it from eating as it treads out the grain. Was God thinking only about oxen when he said this? Wasn't he actually speaking to us? Yes, it was written for us, so that the one who plows and the one who threshes the grain might both expect a share of the harvest. And since we have planted spiritual seed among you, aren't we entitled to a harvest of physical food and drink? If you support others who preach to you, shouldn't we have an even greater right to be supported? But we have never used this right. We would rather put up with anything than be an obstacle to the good news about Christ. Don't you realize that those who work in the temple get their meals from the offerings brought to the temple, and those who serve at the altar get a share of the sacrificial offerings? In the same way, the Lord ordered that those who preach the good news should be supported by those who benefit from it. Okay, so, we start with this question, the question I just asked, why would they challenge his apostleship? Because that's how he started. Well, we get an idea of it here, and there really seems to be two things going on in these verses right here. One, he is defending his right to receive financial support. He's saying, I have the right to receive financial support. Why? Why is he saying that? Why would he feel that he's saying it? Because part of what's going on is he's defending his apostleship. Because in their minds, the fact that he doesn't receive support probably makes him look very unapostle-like to them. Very unleader-like to them. Because the other apostles, if Peter when Apollos came through, they have financially supported him. If Peter came through, we don't know if he did, they probably financially supported it, or supported him. I mean, whether it be they just kept him in their home and fed him, or they threw a couple of chickens in his trunk, I don't know. But they supported him in some shape or fashion. And Paul has never done that. Paul has been a tent maker. and so his ministry is kind of on his own dime. The Philippians kind of helped support some of it, but basically he financed it on his own. Just he had a day job, and then he did that in his own time and with his own effort and his own energy. And the people with him did the same thing. And for them, that looked very unleader-like, very unapostle-like. If he really was the stuff that he says he is, then he should be insisting on their support. If he really was, if he really had the good news of the gospel, then he should carry himself that has the best, like someone who is carrying the best news of all time. If he is someone that that has this authority, then he shouldn't be working a demeaning job like making tents. That seems to be what's in their mind. And so consequently, he looks very unleaderlike to them. And so he's countering that by asserting the fact that he does have that right. He has the right to take a wife with him when he travels. He has the right to be supported. He has the right to do all things. To the end of the day, he defends the fact that he has the right to receive those things, and so do others in ministry. And he wants them to know that. And the fact that he does it does not mean that he is not an apostle. And so he's addressing that head on. Now, why does he need to do that? Because probably the fact that he has been stepping on their toes with things that he's saying, and specifically this issue with participating in the sacrificial meals, some of them aren't liking that so much. And they've been pushing back against his authority. And he probably is anticipating that he's going to get more pushback on that. That's what we do, right? When someone tells us something that we don't want to hear, even if they're right, our first response is, who the heck are you? Who the heck are you to speak into my life that way? And even if it's someone who is in authority over us, we might take it because we have to. But if we can find some chink in their armor, like, well, you're just... Then all of a sudden, it's like we can write them off, right? I'll do just enough to get you off my back, but I have written you off, okay? Just this week, I had to have a lovely conversation with one of the inmate leaders of one of the religious groups at the prison. And because they did something they weren't supposed to, even though we told them, no, you cannot do this because you did not request it in the appropriate time. A day before is not the appropriate time, especially when we don't have anyone scheduled to work. Sorry, you're just out of luck. It was your responsibility. They did it anyway, and they threw a big fit in the hallway, and one of the lieutenants, not knowing, we should have given heads up to lieutenants, and we didn't even think to, but they, not knowing, they caved, and they let him do it, and we were like, oh, crap. So anyway, I know, right? Right? They didn't at the USP, but they did at the FCI. It's like, really? So anyway, I know, the T-Ray is just dying on the inside. You never cave, right? Over the radio, all the time, you hear people just say no. Just say no. That's all you got to do. Just say no. So anyway, this lieutenant, who is really a great guy, but he did not say no. He caved under the pressure. So anyway, so I had a sweet little talk with that inmate. And it did not go well for the first 45 minutes. But then we started to turn a corner in the conversation. And what came to light was he felt like this had been intentionally and maliciously done. And I'm like, really? You think that about us? You think that about me? And what came out was he did not trust me, and he did not trust my leadership, my authority, because something had happened like a year and a half ago, and he had misunderstood what I had done. And he felt like I had behaved in a very unchaplain-like way. And consequently, in his mind, he had written me off. Because even though they're inmates, oftentimes, if you get good ones, you can reason with them. And he would not listen to reason. And what it finally came out was because I had done something that he misunderstood. It was an accident. It was unintentional. But he took it as I did something that I should not have done. And he felt like I had lied, basically. And that he, and so in his mind, he could not trust me anymore. And so he just wrote me off. And so in his mind, even though we were saying this, he would not accept responsibility for his own lack of responsibility. And he just wrote me off. But that's what we do, right? When someone tells us something we don't want to hear, we don't want to accept our own responsibility. We just say the problem is with you. And that seems to be what's going on here. Paul's telling them something they need to hear, and they're like, who are you to tell me this? You don't even accept your own financial support as an apostle. You're about as unapostle looking as you can get. And so that seems to be what's going on. But the second thing so Paul's responding to that, but the second thing he's responding here is he is trying to get them to see that, because he says all this to say, I have this right to do this, and I have this right to do that, we have this right to do this. And usually when someone says, I have all these rights to do this, you expect the next line to be, So give me my rights, daggone it, right? You expect that. And instead, what Paul says is, but we didn't make use of any of those rights. We gave up those rights. And what he's trying to get them to see, and that he's going to kind of explain as the chapter goes on, is one of the most apostle-like things you can do is to give up what you're entitled to for the sake of Christ and his kingdom. That is one of the most apostle-like things you can do. That is one of the most Jesus-like things you do. We follow a crucified Messiah. We follow a guy who gave up his life for us. One of the most Christ-like things you can do is to give up what you're entitled to for the sake of others. And so he's trying to get them to see this very thing that you think disqualifies me is the most Jesus-like thing I could do, to sacrifice what I'm entitled to for the sake of others. But here's the question now. Why does he do that? Why would he choose to not use his rights? Why does he feel the need to do that for the sake of others? Well, let's keep reading. We'll go a little quicker on the others, but let's keep reading. Starting in verse 15. Yet I have, actually I'm going to read the second part of verse 12 again, because he starts into it in verse 12. He says, but we have never used this right. We would rather put up with anything than be an obstacle to the good news about Christ. And then go down to verse 15. Yet I have never used any of these rights. And I am not writing this to suggest that I want to start now. In fact, I would rather die than lose my right to boast about preaching without charge. Yet preaching the good news is not something I can boast about. I'm compelled by God to do it. How terrible for me if I didn't preach the good news. If I were doing this on my own initiative, I would deserve payment, but I have no choice, for God has given me this sacred trust. What then is my pay? It is the opportunity to preach the good news without charging anyone. That's why I never demand my rights when I preach the good news. So he'd already started answering this question back in verse 12. But here it gets into some more, and we find out what his reward is. His reward is, I get to do this for free. I get to preach about the free grace of Jesus free of charge. Because, and probably what he has in mind here is in ancient times, there were a lot of traveling philosophers, traveling teachers. I know I've mentioned that before. And they would go from town to town, and some of them were scam artists, some of them were decent, had maybe some decent ideas. But the way they would, make a living is they would either, set up a school and charge you to be in it, or they would find a wealthy patron, and that patron would, they would basically kind of work for that family. And they might do some things on the side, but they're basically limited to kind of, educating that, that wealthy individual's kids and grandkids and servants and things like that, and family members. And that's how they would pay for it. And what he's saying is, I want to offer this to anybody, to everybody, and I want to do it free of charge. I don't want them to think I'm in this for my own gain. And so that's my reward, that I get to do this free. That's what I'm living for. That's what I love. That's what I want. And so he's trying to get them to see this, that when he does that, he sees something greater at stake, telling people about Jesus without them getting the wrong idea. And so he gives up his rights because he does not want to be misunderstood. He does not want that to be a hindrance to anyone coming to know Jesus. So here's the thing. What does that look like in other contexts? Here he's saying, I give up my right to pay. Well, he goes on in verses 19 through 23. He says this. Even though I am a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. And when I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. And when I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I too lived under that law, even though I'm not subject to the law. I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. When I am with the Gentiles who did not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from that law, so that I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore the law of God. I obey the law of Christ. When I'm with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and share in its blessings. Basically, he's trying to get them to see that part of what it means to give up your rights is that depending on who you're trying to love, depending on who you're with, you might adapt the way you relate to them. And so probably part of what he has in mind in here is his own eating practices. And so he's saying that when I'm with the Jews, I don't eat pork barbecue. Which, can you imagine Paul going his whole life never tasting pork barbecue, and then all of a sudden finding out he's allowed to. That first time he had pork barbecue, he probably went out of his mind, especially if they had sweet tea present. He just probably lost it. Can you imagine having to give up pork barbecue after you finally tasted it after all these years? You smelled it cooking, you could never eat it, and now he can. But he's saying, when I'm with the Jews, I would never eat pork barbecue. Why? Because that would be so offensive to them. They could not hear a word that I'm saying. It would be such a stumbling block for them. I give it up. I don't do that. When I'm with the Gentiles, even though they might put some things in front of me that I used to not eat and some people would think was scandalous, I go ahead and eat it. Why? Because it would be really rude for me to not eat with them or to refuse their hospitality. And we've already learned from Jesus that this doesn't matter anymore, that what we eat doesn't matter. And so even though that might make me uncomfortable or somebody else uncomfortable, I'm going to go for it because that would be showing love to them. Basically what he's saying is, kind of when in Rome, in order to reach the Romans is kind of what he's saying. When I did my internship at Chapel Rock Christian Church in Indianapolis, my youth ministry internship, there were a lot of kids there that were into skating. Now, even in college, I was kind of this, kind of preppy. Paul Brown always kids me about going to college. They got their sweaters tied around their necks. I was kind of preppy. When if I put on something other than a scroungy, sweatpants and off-color sweater. I'm kind of preppy. I look like the World War II generation. That's why grandmas all love me. Because I look like what their husbands looked like 60 years ago. So anyway, it's like, that's what he looked like before he went off to war. So anyway, I'm never going to get a tattoo. I'm not against tattoos, but one, I don't like pain, and two, let's face it, me just growing a little bit of facial hair is scandalous. Because I'm just, that's not the way I'm wired. But at this church, they had a big skater population. So that summer, I got into skating. I learned to rollerblade. I learned to do a half pipe. I worked on that so much, I actually wore I wore the skin off my side, of my hip here, because I fell so many times, and I always fall on that side. Where I had to wear a bandage constantly because the blood would stick to my clothes. It was disgusting. I listened to music. I thought, oh my gosh, this is so offensive to the ears. Not the words, just the sound. It was, No. But I developed some relationship with some kids and some youth sponsors that led to some really beautiful moments of ministry. Because I entered into their world, because I became a part of what they cared about. And the youth minister I was entering with was shocked because he thought I was going to be the preppy one that just kind of did the office stuff. And he loved it. I even let my hair grow a little bit. I grew a little facial hair. All three of them. I let those suckers get it. So that I could minister to those people. And it worked. It was wonderful. And that's kind of what Paul's talking about here. But what he's saying is even more scandalous. Because for some people, him eating different things would have been just a moral gray area. And part of what's going on is they're probably accusing him, saying, hey, you're inconsistent in your eating practices. What's the problem with us? And he says, no, I'm not inconsistent. I am 100% consistent. Because it's not about what I'm eating, it's who I'm loving. And my eating practices might change, but my mode is the same all the way. I will sacrifice whatever it is that may be important to me to love others. And that's what he's trying to get them to see. Now let's read that. So why does Paul, so Paul ends here with this one last illustration, verses 24 through 27. Don't you realize that in a race everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I am not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. This would have been a powerful illustration of it. This was the culture that developed the Olympics, that Greek culture. The city of Corinth, they had their own games. They were called the Isthmian Games. They happened every 2 years. And to be in those games, you had to enter a 10-month training program. You couldn't even be in the games. It didn't matter how good you were. You could not be in the games unless you entered that training program, which meant a strict diet, strict regimen of exercise, and you had to do it, or else you weren't even allowed to compete. So they know what, and what's the point in all that? His point is saying, you guys know that there are times if the cause is important enough, if the reason is important enough, that it's a very normal thing for people to say no to something they're entitled to for that larger purpose. You know, if I told you I was training for a marathon, you'd be like, oh, cool. If you saw me like, you know, eating hamburgers and French fries and pizza and apple pie all the time, and I'm like, yeah, I'm training for a marathon. And you're like, what? Just clarify the marathon. You know, it's just kind of what marathon are you training for? Because the one I know that you train for, you shouldn't be eating that stuff, and you should be running instead, right? Nothing wrong with eating those things if it fits with the goal that you're trying. But if you have this other goal, then part of that larger goal is to say no to those things. And what he's saying is, that's a very normal thing. Well, it's the same thing for being a Christian. Because when you choose to follow Jesus, part of that means saying no to things that someone else might be able to say yes to. But you say no in that moment because that's who God's calling you to be in that moment for those people. And really that's the point. Paul's been saying all this to build up to that point, that that's what it means to follow Christ faithfully. That following Christ faithfully means that you have to let go of things sometimes. That that's what it means to be his disciple. So what does that mean for you and me? What are we supposed to do with that? I think the question it begs of us is, are you willing to give up the things that you are entitled to for the sake of Christ and what he's doing in the world? Are you willing to give that thing up? Whatever that thing is, are you willing to give it up? Are you willing to let go of it? Are you willing to give up that morally gray thing? You know, and I threw out some scenarios last time. Are you willing? Now, don't think, oh, I knew it. He was just trying to figure out how to get me to give up my beer bottles. That's not what I'm saying. You can check my refrigerator. So anyway, but what I'm saying is the heart of the issue. You know, Paul, before he tells them specifically what to do, he wants to tell them, he wants to get them thinking in different ways. And he's already said, are you being arrogant in what you know to be true? And then he says, are you being loving with your actions? How are your actions impacting others? But then the real core issue is, are you willing to give this thing up? Whatever it is, good or bad, I mean, definitely bad, but good, morally gray, are you willing to give it up? What's more important, me or this thing? Because until we're willing to give it up, he can't really give it back to us. And some morally gray things, I mean, we're going to see Paul come back to it in chapter 10. And part of it, he doesn't say a complete prohibition on some things. I mean, we're going to see. He says, don't go to the temples. But if you're at somebody's house and they're eating the meat, that's okay. Except for, and he gives you a scenario. So we're going to see it. There's some context to it, okay? But the heart of the issue is, are you willing to give this thing up, whatever this thing is, out of love and out of a commitment to what I'm trying to do through you and in this world? And you know, when I was thinking through this text, when I was thinking through the sermon, I thought, the question I oftentimes ask myself, and I really had to ask myself this time, because I kept thinking, why do we need to hear this? Why do we need to hear this? And this is where I landed on. We need to hear this because it is so common for us to just convince ourselves that somehow we can follow Jesus, and it's enough to just kind of follow him enough for him to make us just a little bit more respectable, you know, just a little bit nicer, a little bit kinder, clean up some of our bad habits, but other than that, he's really just kind of the seasoning on an already finished life. Is sometimes what we do, and we don't let him to really challenge the core of who we are. And a text like this challenges the core of who we are. He doesn't want to just kind of sand off the rough edges in our life. He wants to refashion us and reform us. And yeah, there are going to be some other things that were already in place and were already good, but he still wants to rework us. And part of the way we know that's happening is when we're willing to sacrifice something that we're fully entitled to. But in that moment and in that context, we know for the sake of others and for the sake of what Jesus is doing in their life, and for the sake of what Jesus is doing in my life and through my life, I need to say no to that right now. I need to say no to that right now. I might need to say no to that permanently, but I certainly need to say no to that right now. And when we get to that point, then we're ready to be the people he's called us to be. Yeah.
I know this isn't a question and answer, but you know, everybody's offended by something.
Sure.
I mean, it seems like everybody is offended.
Sure.
So unless you have a conversation with someone,
sure.
How do you know that thing that you're doing that you probably have the right to do is or is not
he addresses that somewhat in chapter 10, and he got that a little bit in chapter 8. So he's going to come back, and so that's part of it. What he's not talking about is not just offending someone who's easily offendable. Because yeah, you offend everybody. I mean, depending on the people, I probably would have offended somebody 5 times already in the sermon, by things I said and the way I said it. This building is an offense to anyone who goes to a normal church, just to be honest. And so,
I mean, I know the things that won't, like,
right.
I know things, I can give you lots of examples, like my dad would have been offended if I
Sure.
drank a beer in front of him.
Sure, right.
I know that,
Right.
so I would never have drank a beer in front of my dad.
Right.
But, well, I never would drink a beer anyway,
Right. We'll
And
run with that story.
Yeah. So I know those things that would
Right.
offend, but when you're trying to not cross the line of the things that might offend, do you just stay on that straight and narrow and don't do anything because it
Right.
offends somebody?
And yeah, Paul's going to get into that in chapter 10, but he started into it in chapter 8, and what he's talking about is not people who are just offended because it just ticks them off that they think you shouldn't be doing that. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about someone who would be genuinely hurt by your example. So the example I gave last week was a friend of ours up in Chicago who had lived a very wild life and was an alcoholic. And that alcohol was associated with his very, very wild life. So when Jesus rescued him from that wild life, he rescued him from alcohol too. And we had a small group get together, and some of the fellas brought Coronas. And they didn't technically do anything wrong, but that was very hard for him because part of him really wants that old life. And he was tempted to go back to that old life. And so that's what it has in mind. Now, we didn't know that, and we found out about it afterwards. And, so we didn't do anything. In my opinion, we didn't do anything wrong initially, but we would have done something wrong if we continued to do that. Because that's the issue. It's not is it not the prudish Christian who is offended because they think you should be like them. It's the weak believer, whether they're weak because they believe different things, or maybe they came out of a very sinful lifestyle and they've been delivered out of this, and they can't separate out pieces and parts of it. For them, it's an entirety. Whatever it is, that's what he's talking about. And he's not. And so we'll see more when he gets into chapter 10.
So does that mean I have to come back for chapter 10?
Yeah.
I would highly suggest it, but it's totally up to you. It's totally up to you.
Very painful.
I know it is, right? I mean, really, I was tempted to preach through all of 1 Corinthians in one setting, but I couldn't figure out how to do that. So I stretched it out over 8 months. So anyway, so that's what he's getting at, and really, again, whether it's drinking or whether it's gambling or dancing or card playing, whatever. If I had a friend whose family were ravaging avid gamblers, and the sight of a deck of cards would be extremely difficult for them, the loving thing for me is to not say, hey, you want to come over and play euchre? I want to invite them over and play euchre.
But those are clear.
Right.
It's the unclear thing.
Exactly. And
It's
part of
ones
the
that I don't
unclear.
want offended.
Right. And part of the
I don't want to
unclear.
drag somebody out of
Right.
the Christian walk if they're
Right.
You missed that,
How do you know?
so.
We're moving on.
We're going to throw down. Fighting is definitely not cool. Just so you know, that one's not a morally gray area. So it's those areas that are clear. And with the things that are unclear, it's operating under the assumption that when we're going to be in a relationship with people, that we're going to have those conversations. 1 Corinthians is all about unclear areas of life. And how do we navigate that? Which is why when you go through 1 Corinthians and he raises these issues, he doesn't just say, do this or don't do this. He says, think about this for a bit. Think about that. And that's why I think the letter is so applicable to our lives, because we have that stuff too. And we have to sort through it. We have similar issues. And the issue he's dealing with today, really the hardest one, is, are you willing to give it up? Am I more important, or is that thing? Whatever that thing is, are you willing to give it up for me? And when we get to that point, he might just give it back to us. But the question is, are we willing to give it up? Let's pray. God, I thank you for just your habit of stepping on our toes. God, I thank you for the way in which you confront the things that we take for granted, the things that we think we're entitled to. God, I thank you for the way that you, through your word, have a way to get to the core of the issues for us, our own selfishness, our own desire for getting what we want. And I thank you that you don't leave that alone to let us just kind of do what we want, but you challenge that in us. And I pray that you help us to hear the challenge. I pray that you help us to be honest about those areas of our life when we say, God, I'm not sure I'm ready to give this up to you. We don't need to hide that from you. Help us to be honest with you. And then ask you to change our hearts. Ask you to work in us. To bring us to that point where we would be willing to give it up to you. God, help us to look for ways that we can sacrifice for others. Because you're leading us to that. And help us to be aware of those places in our lives where you're calling us to give something up for the sake of your kingdom and the sake of others. And when we find it difficult to do that, God, we pray for your Spirit to fill us and enable us to be that type of people. And we love you. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Go ahead and stand. Let's just sing that song we were singing right before the sermon. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Here I am. Here I stand. But my life is in your hands. Lord, I long to see your desire brings unity. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Take my heart. Take my heart. Take my life as a living sacrifice. All my dreams, all my plans, Lord, I place them in your hands. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. Give myself away so you can use me. My life is not my own. To you I belong. I give myself to you. My life is not my own. To you I belong. I give myself to you. Life is not my own. To you I belong. I to celebrate communion. We're going to sing one more song after that. But we're singing the cross now. But we're going to take a time to just spend some time in prayer, and then spend some time communing with the Father. So I guess I just want you to spend some time praying as asking the Father. And you might have already been doing that as we were singing. But what is it maybe he's asking you to give up for him? You're saying, hey, would you give this up for me? And you don't even know what he's going to do with that if you say yes. Because he might just say, good, now you can have it back. But what is it, that thing that you say, man, by golly, I'm entitled to this? What might he be asking you to give up? And just spend some time praying. And then after a few moments, I'm going to pray, and we're going to celebrate Holy Communion. And when I pray, after I'm done, if you would, those who are sitting near a tray, if you would, just send it around, and just commune with the one who gave himself up for us. And then the rest of the New Testament says, hey, will you be like him? That's the one place we're consistently called to be like him, is to just sacrifice ourselves for others. And so we can remember that as we take his body and take his blood into our body and into our blood. But let's spend some time praying and ask how God might want to change each of us. Jesus, we thank you for going to the cross for us. We thank you that when you came to earth, you were the ruler, but you didn't act like a ruler. You were the king, and you are the king, and yet you didn't act like a king. Or at least our understanding of what a king is. You are all powerful and are all powerful, and yet you didn't use your power. Thank you for that example. And thank you for the way you showed that most of all when you went to the cross. And show us what it means to take up our cross daily and to follow you. Show us what it means to take up our cross daily in the classroom. Or at a grain bin. Or talking to people buying the seed. Or working in a hospital. Whatever it is that we're doing. Working on cars. God, I pray that you'll show us what it means. That loving our kids, taking our kids to practice, leading those practices. For our students, being in those practices, being in those activities, being in the classroom. Show us what it means to die daily, to take up our cross, to follow you. And teach us that even as we remember that, and commune with you and remember what you did for us on the cross. So God, we thank you for that. Thank you for that sacrifice. Jesus, we thank you for your blood, for your body broken for us. We thank you for your blood shed for the forgiveness of our sins. And we remember you now. So if you're sitting in your tray, go ahead and grab it and take it and send it around to others. And just when you're ready, you can take it on now. you're still taking communion, just feel free to do so. As long as you want. But if you're not, you want to stand and sing the word of God. This week, and that we will live differently as a result. Lord, we love you in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a great week.
Hey, if anybody wants peaches, they're outside the door. Please take them.
Peaches outside the door. Take them. And that's not a nickname for
bags
some
out there,
girl.
too.
It's for peaches.
Yeah, take what you want.
Crazy.